Welcome to the In Factor, conversations about how great entrepreneurs started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and today's guest is Soumyadeb Mitra. Soumyadeb is the founder and CEO of a successful Series A startup, RudderStack, which was founded in June 2019 and has raised $26 million in funding so far. Before starting RudderStack, he was also a founder of a B2B ad tech platform called MarianaIQ, which got acquired by 8x8. Soumyadeb has a PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois and resides in the Bay Area now. In this podcast, we dive into the opportunities and issues of big data today, how entrepreneurs and businesses are using information, the challenges of building a venture-backed company, and lessons learned as a serial entrepreneur. I hope you enjoy this episode. Soumyadeb, thank you for joining me today on In Factor.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm truly excited and humbled to be here.
Yes, well, I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. I'd love to hear a little bit about. I know right now the business you've started and you're working with is RudderStack. Mm-hmm. So of course we want to hear about RudderStack and what RudderStack is and how you provide value for customers. But I'd also love to hear how you got to this point with this company. So could you tell us a little of your background and tell us a little bit about RudderStack?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So I can maybe start with RudderStack and go back into my background. So I started RudderStack in 2019. So I've been doing it for the last 2.5 years. I'll come and talk about RudderStack. But before that, I spent a year in this company called 8x8. And most probably people would not have heard of them, but it's a public company in the telecom space. So they build phone systems and teleconferencing systems and so on. And my charter there was to work on machine learning and data science and so on. But what I mostly ended up doing was to work on a bunch of customer data problems, right? So bring all the customer data that we have about our customers into one place and then do analytics and do machine learning and things like, can we predict which customers are going to churn or which customers are going to buy new products? Can we predict that? And then so that the sales and marketing can be more focused, right? So those are the kind of problems I was working on. And the challenges I faced in putting together that architecture is what prompted me to start RudderStack. Now, I'll talk about RudderStack later. But so before that, I was the co-founder and CTO of this company called MarianaIQ. I founded that with two other folks. They were ex-McKinsey. They have run marketing in large organizations. And I was the technical guy. And what we were trying to do was to build the next generation marketing automation system. So instead of marketeers having to create campaigns and so on, automate everything with machine learning. And we sold that product to a bunch of large enterprises like Microsoft and Junipers of the world. But one thing we learned in the process that most marketing teams do not have good data. And so if you do not have good data, then you cannot do machine learning and so on. And that's the problem we started to fix at 8x8. Let's first collect the data, then we'll do ML. But then we figured out that even collecting the data was hard. And that's what we are trying to do with RudderStack. So my journey was with RudderStack was almost reverse, right? We tried to do ML, realized data was hard, then solving that with RudderStack. But hopefully we'll solve the entire problem, starting with collecting the data to solving those ML problems on customer data. And before that, I have a PhD in data. So I have mostly worked in data all my life. In fact, during my PhD, we worked on these large rocket simulations. So we are doing big data before any of this was cool. But yeah, I have worked with data all my life, but data applied to marketing in the last couple of years.
So that's really interesting. You're in a fascinating space, a very timely space. And you said your background was in data. What fascinated you about taking that pathway? And I guess even more so, a lot of our audience, that we have a student audience and a lot of entrepreneurs out there. If you want to know more about machine learning and AI and data, how do you educate yourself? There's so much out there to learn and so much to know. Where did your passion come from, you think, and how would you recommend somebody who has an interest in that getting prepared for that world?
Yeah, I think like, again, I mean, my opinions are shaped by what I have seen in the world, right? I mean, I think machine learning is kind of overhyped a bit, like in this market, right? I think, but like the core data problems are like not always ML problems, right? I mean, I think even if you look at like large companies, the majority of the time is spent on collecting data, cleaning the data up, and so on. So there's a lot of like data engineering foundation that anyone has to build before you can do ML. And when it comes to machine learning, there are like traditional approaches. Like when I was in grad school and when we were doing ML, like there are like algorithms like SVMs and logistic regressions and all that stuff, like random forest, which were like built over the last like 30, 40 years. And then in 2000, like late 2010 and then this decade, we saw like a massive explosion of deep networks, like neural networks and so on. But like in practical problems, the old techniques are good enough, because in most companies, there is like the basic problem is not having enough data. So not having data, not having clean data, collecting data is a pain, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is like, if somebody is interested to like build a career or even like start a company, I think like it is better to focus on core fundamental data problems, right? I mean, how do you like collect data? How do you clean data? And it's not like so you probably have to do like a computer science course or like there are now data focused courses also. I would suggest that you do that, and then like you can take a couple of courses on ML and so on. But I think like like starting with ML without a fundamental training on data is actually like would be harder and may not set someone for success for the long term. Is what I think.
Yeah. So you bring up this issue, and I've seen it as well. I'm on a number of company boards, and some of them even pretty mature companies, product-based companies, and there's not necessarily a lack of data, but a lack of usable data, maybe.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit more about RudderStack and, what the problem that you're trying to solve, and who's your customer? I mean, who would buy your product?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, to answer that, maybe I'll tell you a current landscape of how things are done today, and then what we are trying to change, right? So like we focus on customer data, and what I mean by that is like, if you are like a consumer company, let's start there. I mean, it's relevant for B2B companies as well, but let's say you are a B2C company, like let's say you are Crate and Barrel or like your Priceline or one of those companies, and you want to understand your customers' behavior and what your customers are doing on the website, on the app, and so on. And why would you want to do that? Like, number one, you want to analyze like what they are doing and like make the product experience better. So if you know that like a lot of people are dropping off from the sign up fund page, something needs to be fixed and so on, right? So product analytics is a big part of like why you need to collect data. Then you need to do marketing, like, so based on your behavior in the app, let's say you search for some products, search for a hotel, and you dropped off without buying, then maybe they should send you a coupon saying that, okay, like there's 20% off in hotels in LA if you're looking for hotels in LA, whatever, right? So you want to do marketing based on what you did in the app, right? So there is a marketing use case for collecting data. Then there are more advanced ML use cases, right? I mean, let's say you are a subscription business and you collect all the customer data, and based on that, you want to like predict which are the customers who are likely to churn. They are very active and they are no longer active. So then maybe you want to give them a coupon and something, right? So that's kind of the other reason you want to like collect customer data. So there are a whole lot of reasons for collecting customer data, and the traditional way people have been solving this is buying vertically integrated SaaS solution. So you would buy something like Amplitude or like some Mixpanel or some like product analytics tool and send on the customer data to that, and then you use for analytics. Similarly, you send everything to a marketing system for doing this, right? So you send this customer data to like 5 different systems for 5 different use cases, right? That's the way traditionally things are done. The biggest problem with that is now you create these data silos, right? I mean, like each one has only limited view of the data and so on. Now, And then you cannot, like, these systems are not very configurable. You can only do what comes out of the box, right? If you have to customize the ML model for your use case, you cannot do that, and so on. So that's kind of that's the traditional way. In the last, I would say, like 5 to 10 years, what has happened is you have seen the explosion of data warehouses, right? You have seen Snowflake and the big queries and the Redshift of the world really exploding. So what that has enabled is collection of customer data, like any data, not just customer data. Now it has become much easier to collect data, process that, and analyze that, and so on. Right? So that's kind of one macro trend that has happened. Because of that, we have seen this like trend from like this traditional way of like where marketing team collects customer data and product team collects customer data and every other support team collects customer data in their own silos. Instead of that, you collect everything into a data warehouse, a central place, and then you do all these interesting things on top of that data, whether analytics, whether ML, and so on. The downstream tools are still relevant. You still need a marketing tools to send an email. You still need like an analytics tool to visualize and create funnels. You need those tools, but your source of truth, like the data, is in your data warehouse, right? So that's the trend where like multiple silos to single source of truth, which then powers all these applications, right? So that's the world we are getting into. And that's what we are betting on, right? I mean, we are a platform which enables, firstly, the data collection into the warehouse. Like we can collect the data into the warehouse, we can activate the data out of the warehouse. But more importantly, we'll also build tools which will make it easy for you to like analyze the data in the warehouse, right? I mean, how do you like create views and like and identity staging? There are a whole lot of things we can do on top of the warehouse, but specifically focused to customer data. So I don't know if it is a very long way to answer your simple question.
No. That's great, because it's what you're talking about really is kind of being the system that can bring it all together, so that we can get more value from all of this information that's coming in, and we can actually we can turn the data actually into information, usable information. And does it also mean with RudderStack that we're able to share that throughout the organization in a more meaningful way?
Yeah. So we haven't built like sharing means a lot of things, right? I mean, like one is like you today we enable data collection into a warehouse, right? Like you pull all the data into the warehouse. Now, like you can share the raw data. Like, I mean, let's say I create a table in the warehouse, like a table which you can query with SQL, and then like you can share the table with like everyone else in the company, right? So like that is one level of sharing, and that is enabled by the warehouse itself. Like we don't have to do much. I mean, in Snowflake, you can give people access to the data, right? The next level of sharing is like you don't want to share the raw data, but you connect like some kind of a visualization layer. Like let's say you connect like Tableau or Looker, or you create some dashboards, and then you share those dashboards with the rest of the organization, because like nobody wants the raw data anyway. They want to look at some KPI. Right. So that is like the next level of sharing. So to answer your question, the sharing is enabled by these applications, either the warehouse or the visualization layers, not so much by the RudderStack. We are kind of the plumbing layer to move the data in and out, but also like the processing layer to process the data in the warehouse, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So how long has RudderStack been around? And tell me a little bit about the organization. You're the CEO.
Yeah.
Are you also the founder of RudderStack? Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how RudderStack as a company came to be, and a little bit about the company.
So we are a 2.5-year-old company. So we just started in 2019. And again, like it came from like my experience and my investors' experience on like in this broader space. And then like we started in 2019. We raised a small amount of money, built the product. We are also an open source product because we are selling primarily to developers. And when you're selling to developers, open source does matter. Like sometimes like developers do care about open source. So yeah, I mean like that's what. And then like initially we kind of grew from there. When you're selling to developers, Hack and News, I don't know if you follow Hack and News, but it's like one of the popular sites for developers. So we got on Hack and News a couple of times, and that got us exposure and mindshare and so on. And then, and then we have been growing since then. Today, we are almost a team of like 80 people, and we have like a team in India, a team in Greece, a team in US, and we are a very distributed org, right? I mean, pretty much we have some offices, but like pretty much everyone, including me, is working out of a home or a WeWork.
Yeah. So how, I guess several questions come up out of that, but, one quick question, I think, how has the pandemic affected what you're doing? So you started in 2019, and so you've got a virtual team,
Yeah.
and you might have had a virtual team anyway, at least for a big part of your team, but how has the pandemic affected maybe the need for your product or the interest in your product?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, I feel bad to say this because, like, I mean, I know pandemic has affected a lot of people in very bad ways, but like from a pure business perspective, I mean, it has been a great boost, right? I mean, because like with the pandemic, every business is realizing the value of like getting online, right? I mean, like you cannot afford to have stores only, right? You have to be online. I mean, I was looking at this chart which showed that US e-commerce adoption was like jumped ahead by almost 10 years, like, and so on.
Right.
Right. So, and this macro trend helps anyone which is like working with the broader space of customer data, not just us, right? I mean, like part of like getting online is you want to collect all the data, you want to personalize the experience because like everything is now online. So I think like that way is definitely helped. The other way is like, I mean, the stock market is at an all-time high, right? So whenever that is there, like, I mean, it does trickle down to like early stage funds and like it becomes easier to raise money and so on. So I think again, I know it's like, it's kind of a weird thing to say, and given, I mean, I have a lot of people in my family have been affected too, but like business wise, I'm not complaining.
Right. I mean, and business wise, there have been clear winners that have come out of the pandemic, and then there's been losers, and it's been painful for a lot of people. But I was guessing that because of, what you just said. I mean, I think I heard that in 12 months, we advanced like 12 years. So,
yeah.
And I know that happened here in the academic world, as an educator, we began to understand how we could use technology in new ways. And I think a lot of companies did. And as a lot of things went virtual, the need to collect data from customers virtually started to grow exponentially too, I'm sure. I mean, and to understand and process that data. So your company, you said you had about 80 employees. Did I understand that? So you're CEO of a growing company. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about. You're definitely coming from a technology background. How does that work to become CEO? And what are some of the lessons you've learned? Who are some of your role models as CEOs?
Yeah, I mean, like learning is a good thing. I mean, like I almost had to unlearn a lot of things to get to this point. Like, and I'll give an example. Like I was in grad school, right? And when you're doing your PhD, like the only thing that matters is like how innovative is the thing you're working on, right? I mean, it did not have any market relevance, but like whatever you're publishing has to be unique and nobody else has done this before, right? That is what gets valued. And that's how you get published, right? If someone has even remotely done anything like that, you will not get a paper.
Right.
That is all about academia. Like, how do you find a very unique niche, right? And then I left after my PhD. I went to this company, like worked for 3 years, and then I started a company. And then I was kind of following the same trend, right? I came up with a very unique idea. I thought was brilliant. Like nobody has thought of it, and I tried to build a company around it, and nobody cared, right? I mean, like it was very hard to like convince people to like do things, right? And then like I did another company where again, like we are trying to do very similar thing. We are trying to do machine learning to like, again, try to solve the problem, but try to do it in a very unique way. Now, I think like one thing I've learned again through all these painful experiences is like uniqueness really doesn't matter in when you're starting a company, right? I mean, you can literally copy one company and then like still make it huge by better execution, better like product, better like customer support. Pick any dimension, you can do better than that, and then you can out execute the leader in the space, right? And one thing again, so that's kind of one thing. I mean, like finally, only thing that matters is not uniqueness, but the market opportunity. Right? Is the market there, and can you execute to capture that market? Right? That's the only thing that matters, right? So I mean, like so again, like I mean, it was kind of obvious. Right? If you're building a business, you have to be like you have to have a market, but it's surprisingly not clear to me, right? I mean, you see, like I mean, even now I see like I learned this hard way after like multiple startups which did not go well, but I still see startups, right? there are big problems which, like, pick any existing company. Microsoft has a product. It is building like $5 billion of revenue. It is a shitty product. Nobody wants, but nobody is trying to build that. Versus like people are trying to build like cool AI ML next generation, some problem which like nobody cares about. The market is not there, right? So I think that's one thing. Again, I guess like you have to learn the hard way.
I think timing is underestimated a lot of times in the success of. When I'm teaching my classes, I talk about the origin of the word opportunity, and it comes from the Latin phrase ob portu, which referred to, it's in Latin, it means toward port. So it referred to the times back in the days before ports were dredged, when the captain and crew was waiting and watching to see when the tide was rise and the wind was right to go to port. So when you think about that analogy, I think it's perfect for what you're talking about. You know, it is about opportunity. It is about creating value, obviously, for customers. But if that's not at the top of their needs list, then that opportunity isn't there. So, you know, and just like the captain and crew, if you try to go to shore and the tide hasn't risen enough for you to get there, you're going to run aground. So, you know, those are great lessons, and I love hearing you talk about that.
Yeah, this is, I didn't know about that, but yeah, this is a good thing to know and like share. Maybe I'll share this in my next podcast.
Yeah, sure. You know, you and I we know someone in common, my graduate student, Indraja, I call her Ivy, and you worked with her some, and she's Indian and here living in the United States. And you know, one of the questions that she had, and I know a lot of our students, we have a lot of international students, is how hard has it been to be an immigrant, you know, in another country starting a business, and what kinds of things what have you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, like, to be honest, like, I mean, I have lived in multiple places. Like, I spent a lot of time in Germany during my undergrad, during my PhD. And then I traveled quite a bit in Europe and so on. So I think one thing I must say is, like, I mean, like, I never felt out of place in the US, right? I mean, the language is probably a big part of it, but culturally also, right? I think like that the society is so open to immigrants. And again, I never lived in like rural America, so I cannot talk about that. But like from the day I landed in like in UIUC, I mean, I flew into Illinois and I met my advisor, and like I stayed there for 4 years, then moved to the Bay Area. So I don't think I ever had any problem like being an immigrant. I mean, like initially, yes. I mean, like I had an accent, so I had to maybe like ordering things in a subway was slightly harder. I mean, like, and getting what I wanted, but then like you spend like 6 months and you get over it, and so on. So I mean, like, I don't think like, yeah, I mean, I like, it would be unfair to say to the society in US. I mean, I'm grateful to that, like how welcoming everyone has been to like.
Yeah, you know, as an educator who has students in my class from all over the world, that's one of the things I probably enjoy the most, because I think having different perspectives and coming from different backgrounds can really enhance the creative output of the group. And so I think it's, you know, I think, like you mentioned, there are oftentimes small things in translation and communication that you have to overcome, but I think it adds value for all of us to come together from different backgrounds. So I'm really curious about, you know, is your entire team remote now, and or a big part of it is remote? And could you talk a little bit about, you know, what it's like to manage a remote team? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs that might be listening to this may be facing this for the first time. And I know in technology, it's been probably more common to have remote workers for longer, but, you know, we're seeing it now in virtually every workplace. And do you think there are any unique, you know, unique tips that you might, or things that make it different that you might be able to share about managing remote workforces?
So yeah, again, caveat whatever I say with the statement that I have not managed huge teams, right, in my past. So I cannot compare like in person versus remote. That's one thing. And the other thing is managing engineers is like, even when we are in person, like I had people in my team were working remotely and so on. Like engineering was like always like very like remote friendly, right? I mean, because like you generally are working in your own silo, right? So with those two caveats, and that's what we have done at RudderStack also, right? We have an international team. I mean, they go to office, like we have offices in a couple of places, but like otherwise, a lot of them are also working remotely. So I don't think we ever had any problem managing the engineering teams. Although I'm the CEO, I'm not directly managing the sales team and the support teams and so on. So like somebody else is doing that. So I mean, maybe they are the right. I mean, I should ask them like if they're facing any challenges, but I don't think so. And also, I think if you are like from day one remote, I think that does impact things also. Right? I mean, we are pretty much like we are born during the pandemic, right? Within like I don't know 5 months the pandemic hit, right? So I think given that like we are from day zero a remote first company and like culturally, so that kind of we kind of put in place processes and culture and so on to like make it suitable for that world, if that makes sense.
So you have to do it at least kind of thoughtfully and in terms of putting the processes and things in place to
I don't even say that. I mean, we are kind of forced into that, right? So I mean, like,
okay.
like say if you are remote and then you are having a Zoom call and like your architecture decisions are being done on a Zoom call, then you have to write a technical spec. You cannot whiteboard, right? So you're forced to get into more of a written culture and like track things properly and so on. So like and discuss more things on Slack. So we are almost like forced into this whatever we have today. And then like communication becomes, when you're interviewing people, you know that communication is very important. Like communication, like I mean, you want people who are like good to talk to and so on. So again, like this, you're forced into that literally.
So the principles are the same, really, in a lot of ways. Good communication and keeping track of meetings and information and organizing, and so a lot of it stays the same. You know, let's talk just a little bit. I'm very curious about, you're in the data space and customer data space, and I'm wondering what you see in the future for that space and kind of how RudderStack plans to fit into that. Like, what are your thoughts about the future?
Yeah, I think like the world is getting into this, like in the data warehouse first thing I was talking about, right? So initially, like if you like rewind back, right? I mean, in the late 90s, it was all about like IT managed, right? IT was buying Oracle and like they were buying like SAP and deploying all these solutions, and then like they're building solutions for marketing and product. So we were in that world, and they're like very costly IT budgets, right? So that was one world. Then came the whole SaaS world, right? I mean, like Salesforce said, like doesn't make sense. Like Salesforce started the cloud software business, and then they're like SaaS products for everything. Like product creates a SaaS, and like marketing has a SaaS solution, and everyone else, right? So we have kind of like, I believe that we have almost like run that course, right? In the sense that we are kind of now seeing challenges with that approach, because now we are creating so many different data silos, right? Every team has their own version of customer data, and they're doing some processing on top of that data that is not visible anywhere, right? So that's kind of one trend that we have seen. And the other thing that has happened is like deploying this IT infrastructure. You have to buy like this huge Oracle racks to get started. Now, starting a Snowflake warehouse on the cloud is like you like swipe a credit card and $50 you have a warehouse, right? Where you can dump like infinite amount of data. So it's kind of like, I think going back to that original world, it will go back where your data is at least centralized. And then you still have applications which are like the UI layer or the activation layer, which is sending out emails, which could be on the cloud. But like people would realize that there is a certain value to storing and owning that core customer data, like because like and not creating data silos. On top of that, like all the privacy regulations, GDPR are kind of, and cookies going away, and all these macro trends also are forcing to that like world where you don't want to like just have your customer data spread all over the place, right? So I think that's the world we are betting on, right? I mean, that's where the world will be in like 5 years, 10 years, and we want to be the plumbing layer or the platform on top of which this thing gets built, right? And so on. So that's kind of like the high level about this.
So as you look towards that, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see for your company coming up in the next, say, 3 years?
I think, like as a VC funded business, right? I mean, like your like growth is extremely important. I mean, you may have a very good vision and so on, but like what matters is like, am I hitting my revenue metrics this year and the next year and the year after and so on? So like, it's the vision is important to get the team excited and like to go to a destination is important, but the path is also equally important and how you execute, right? So I think you have to be very heads down and like keep hitting those revenue numbers, because like if you keep doing that, then you'll get funded, then you can keep growing the team and you can execute that on that vision. So I think like often like, so like it's kind of like balancing that like short-term execution with like the longer-term vision. And I think like a lot of the challenges are on the short-term execution, right? I mean, today I'm not worried about my vision. Today I'm worried about one of my customers, some product is not working, right? So that's that's the day in, day out fight. You have to like, do that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's interesting. I mean, you brought up the being a venture funded company, and I have to go down that path because, there a lot of our listeners are interested in that. And I think you make a really good point. There's milestones along the way, and you just have to keep ticking those off and keep heading down that path. And a lot of times that means sales, right? That means getting the customer sales. Could you talk just a little bit about what you've learned about being a venture, from being a venture funded company, for some of the listeners who might have a concept, who need to go out and raise money, any advice for raising money and what you've learned from going through that process?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think firstly I would say is like raising money is not the only way to build a business, right? I mean, that's one thing. Like, I mean, even I was like that. I thought like raising money was like an outcome, like you would be excited about. I raised money, right? But like, it is not really an outcome. Right? Outcome is to build a business later, right? And like there's multiple paths to building great businesses. Raising money is this VC path only works in a very narrow focus of tech businesses and so on. There's so many other great businesses being built without raising money. So that's, I think we should like underplay raising money as like an outcome, like which a lot of founders get excited about. So that's one thing. Now, beyond that, I think like, what do VCs look for, right? I mean, the whole VC model is built on this hypothesis that like 1 in 100 will succeed, and that 1 in 100 will pay for all the 99 failures, right? So that's the whole business model. They're not trying to make like 20% margins on their investments, right? So it's very important for you to convince your VC at whatever stage, the early stage, late stage, is there is a 1 in 100 chance that this is like a $10 billion business or like a $100 billion business, right? So like, I mean, you need to believe that, and like, unless you believe that, you cannot convey it to your VC also, right? So I think that huge potential outcome is important. And a lot of businesses are not that. I mean, there are a lot of markets where you don't have a $10 billion market, right? So I think that's why I think like, but you may still be passionate about it. Like, I want to do something. So I think like, that's the lengths I think everyone should wear. Like, and it's kind of like, do you want to do that? And the third thing is like, and it's like having money solves a lot of problems. We can attract great talent and can like really like scale the business. So there are a lot of good things about like having money and then scaling, but then there are a lot of pressure also, right? I mean, like you have to grow like 3x, 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 2x, 2x, right? I mean, in like 5 years, you are expected to grow from 0 million in revenue to 40, 50 million in revenue, right? And like probably more, and which is hard, right? And so like, and I say like, there have been great businesses have been built without VC money, and great businesses have been built with VC money. So there is no right answer, but like in either case, like you just have to make sure that your business goals align with what VCs look for, and not treat VC money as just an outcome. I mean, it's just one of the ingredients you need.
I think that's fantastic advice. I have seen too many companies who have done exactly that. And, the goal was to raise money, and, that was the outcome, and that's what they talk about. That's the PR. But, at the end of the day, that doesn't get you where you need to get to build a successful company. I mean, that, like you said, in a small percentage of companies, that's necessary to get where you need to get, but it's not the only way. So really, really great advice. I love that. I could talk longer, but I know you've got a lot to do running a startup that's been around for a couple of years, and it is venture backed, and you have a lot of work to do. But it's been such a pleasure to have you. I always like to ask my guests to share one piece of advice that they would leave with our listeners about this whole process of the entrepreneurial journey. So before we go, Soumyadeb, what would be your one piece of advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I think I always make this quote. There's a quote from Anderson, and it's not mine quote. So I think it goes like this, right? So when a good team, bad market wins. A bad team, good market wins. And a good team, good market, magic happens, right? So that is I think summary of all companies, right? So it's finally market which determines everything, and you need to have a good team and so on. But I think and by market, I guess they also mean the timing and the things that you talked about.
Right, that we've talked about. Great advice. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we go, where can our listeners find out more about you and RudderStack, and maybe connect with you and or your company?
Yeah, so I mean, RudderStack.com is our website, and RudderStack.com is pretty easy. And my name is Soumyadeb, and because of my unique name, I have first name everywhere. So first name at Gmail, first name at RudderStack, and first name at LinkedIn. So yeah, I mean, feel free to, if you know my first name, you can pretty much first name at whatever, you'll find me.
We can find you, right? Well, thank you, Soumyadeb, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
I really appreciate you inviting me to the podcast. I had a lot of fun, and thanks for doing this.